Me now to discuss the issue are former New York State Senator David Carlucci and Rafael Mangual of the Manhattan Institute, who's writing a book on the subject. And David, I'd like to start with you. I mean, you look at that video, there's a lot of outrage. You heard the mayor of New York. Why is this 16-year-old out on the streets? That was a serious assault.
Well, that's right. I mean, we look at this video and it's disturbing. But we can't let this be the overall decision and act like every youth in New York is committing these types of crimes. Look, the intent of Raise the Age is to do just that, to keep children out of the prison system. We know that the #1 way to have more recidivism is to lock up children. Now, the law as its intent is supposed to provide the funding to have wraparound services. So when a child like this commits a crime like we've seen, that they have support to turn their life around. I've seen it too often that if we lock up children, we're building a foundation to have their life be just a continuous in and out of the criminal justice system. So the intent of this law is to provide those services, divert these children to a family court judge who has the expertise and the experience to deal with these children.
You know, Rafael, I think you disagree. And a lot of New Yorkers have a real hard time with that. In theory, that sounds, everything David says sounds right and correct. They're kids. Let's give them a chance to turn their lives around. But, you know, nearly half of them are getting rearrested. The 16-year-old in that video, third arrest in less than 4 months. Right. He had the officer in a chokehold.
Yeah, a chokehold that would have sent the officer to jail had he done it to that kid in that fight. And so, yeah, I think you're exactly right. This sounds really good. The rhetoric that led to Raise the Age and a lot of other criminal justice reforms was the rhetoric of second chances. But as that case illustrates, it is very rarely the case that someone facing serious sanctions in our criminal justice system is actually being denied a second chance. If you just look at the general prison population, you're looking at people who, on average, have somewhere between 10 and 12 prior arrests and 5 and 6 prior convictions before their most recent incarceration. You know, people who do come into contact with the criminal justice system as first-time offenders, even before Raise the Age, were regularly given that very much needed second chance, and that's illustrated by the broader data sphere. Now, the idea that we know how to rehabilitate these offenders at scale, let alone reliably, it just doesn't have any real support in the data, and it's shown by the nearly 50% recidivism rate or rearrest rate, and that's just in the first year after enactment, which drastically undercuts the reoffending problem, because someone who was initially arrested, say, 6 months after enactment will have had less time to reoffend than someone who was arrested the day after.
So is the problem that we didn't get the funding? I mean, is the problem that we're not spending enough, you know, at a time when obviously we're in a huge financial crisis? I mean, I guess, how do we fix this? Yeah. What's the solution?
The idea that this is a funding problem is resting on an assumption that we actually know how to spend that money in order to reliably rehabilitate these offenders.
And you're saying we don't.
The evidence just doesn't exist for that kind of scalable, reliable rehabilitation program. It doesn't exist. That's the sad reality. So what we have to do is maximize the incapacitation benefits that are associated with the incarceration of individuals who, through their repeated criminal action, have shown that they are not willing to play by society's rules for the foreseeable future.
We know that this came, I mean, these Raise the Age laws came in result of after a lot of horror stories came out. There was a kid who was arrested for, like, stealing a backpack, sent to Rikers Island because he couldn't post bail, ended up committing suicide, you know, sometime later. We don't want young, vulnerable kids in the prison system.
Of course.
But you don't want people like that 16-year-old at the subway stop who was just asked to leave, by the way, because he jumped the stile. It wasn't like the officer was trying to arrest him.
Right.
He just asked him and his girlfriend to please leave the subway stop, and that's when this happened.
Right, and it's not only that incapacitating some of these offenders by incarcerating them, whether in a jail or a youth detention facility, you know, hurts them. Releasing them doesn't necessarily lead to better outcomes, right? It gives them further opportunities to ruin their lives by committing more crimes that are increasingly serious, where they will face more harsh penalties, but also giving them the chance to be victimized. So a source of mine at the NYPD shared some data with me, and what he found was that 11% of shooting victims were under 18 in 2021 compared to just 5.5% in 2017. That's a significant increase. So it's not just that we are putting the community at risk by virtue of giving these kids another chance to reoffend, but we're also putting the kids themselves at risk because they are running in circles in which they are often victims as well.
David Carlucci, 10 seconds to respond. Do you agree that something needs to change? Because it looks like it's about to. Political support is not for this at this point.
Well, I would disagree because I think there's no evidence that shows that crime decreases when we lower the age of criminal responsibility for children. And so we're just pointing at a red herring here. Yes, that video is egregious, offensive, but that's one case out of 20 million New Yorkers. So I think we can't jump to conclusions. I think we have to be very careful here and make sure we weigh the evidence in its entirety. And we see that this is an extreme case that we're showing this video of. But to do it right, we provide wraparound services and make sure we deter those children from entering the criminal justice system, which is proven to be a revolving door. And we have to stop that process. If it were an issue of crime going up, crime is up across the country. So this is not unique to New York State, but yet we're pointing to these red herrings like raise the age, which I think is inappropriate, and we have to do our due diligence to really solve the problem.
All right. Well, we're not going to solve it tonight on this show, but I hope that we'll continue to follow this, and I hope we do solve it because it's urgent. David Carlucci, Rafael Mangual, thank you so much both for being with me tonight. Up next is